Alright, so now we're on to talking about the New Deal in some detail. So we want to deal with the impacts of the New Deal, what the New Deal actually is, and why FDR put it in place, and basically the underpinnings and theories behind it. So we're going to talk about less spending. Don't worry about those book and page numbers. We're not going to worry about those today. And how FDR's New Deal tactics basically improved life for Americans and stabilized the economy to a certain extent leading into World War II. Alright, so first things first, 1932, we have presidential elections. FDR ran against Herbert Hoover. Now, guess what? There's a Great Depression. People blame the head of government for anything. Even if you can trace back who's at fault and it doesn't end up being the president, it's still the president's fault. Because the president is considered like the head of government because he's the most vocal, the most out there, most known. So you had Herbert Hoover as president, so guess who everybody blamed? And they had a right to because he did some things that made no sense and didn't help deal with the Depression. So the Republicans nominated President Hoover, and they basically knew he wasn't going to win. Like when they nominated him at the convention, they were like, we know we're losing. We knew before we even started the primaries we're going to lose. And then they blamed the president for all the bad stuff that was happening in America. The Democrats chose Franklin Delano Roosevelt. He was a two-term governor out of New York. He was very amicable. He was very charismatic. He was a reform-minded kind of person. Like he was a change agent. Like he came in and wanted to change things around. He quote unquote possessed a can-do attitude. People basically trusted him, and he just trounced Hoover. He beat him 23 million votes to 16 million of Hoover's votes. So he just absolutely destroyed Hoover. And he then proceeds to win 4 total elections. So he won the 32 election, the 36 election, the 1940 election, and the 1944 election, although he died shortly thereafter. They passed an amendment after FDR finally dies, basically saying you can only serve 2 terms as president, and that basically changes the rules around quite a bit. And there's FDR in the back of this car. We're not going to talk about too much in here, but FDR was actually crippled. He was paraplegic as a result of polio. He had polio when he was a child. And there he is in his wheelchair. This is a very uncommon picture. So one of the things that, as a result of stereotypes and stigmas, is that if you are crippled or if you are disabled, it puts an air of weakness about you. So there was actually people who were in charge to basically just walk around with the president and make sure people did not take pictures of him while he was in his wheelchair. This was taken later in his life. He was in his wheelchair, but they got a picture of it. It's very, very uncommon to see pictures of him. They'd actually have guys walk around, and if they caught someone take a picture of him while the president's in his wheelchair, they'd basically grab the camera, rip the film out of it, and then hand the camera back to him, exposing the film, damaging the film so he couldn't use the pictures to develop them. It was basically a public relations issue trying to make the president seem strong. They put braces on him so he could stand up at a podium. All kinds of stuff was done to make sure that the president did not even possibly put out this air of weakness as a result of his disability. All right, Eleanor Roosevelt. Now, she's a big figure in women's history and in the role of the First Lady during Roosevelt's presidency, because one of the things she did was people wrote letters to her. People who were in Hoovervilles would just write letters and say, I have this happening, I have this happening. And her response would be very caring, but it's like, keep trying, keep working, you'll make things better. But obviously, what's the First Lady going to do? Just write a check every time she gets a letter? She can't do that. So she would put out she would write back, and sometimes it'd be a secretary writing back, sometimes it'd be her, mostly the secretaries, and you never knew if it was her or not. But but basically she was the public relations side of the presidency on a lot of things, especially dealing with the plight of individual people. So here's the First Lady visiting a children's hospital. All right, Marian Anderson. All right, so this Easter Sunday, 1939. We're talking, she's going to go up there and sing on the Capitol Mall. Now, the reason why she's singing at the Capitol Mall is because she was not allowed to sing at the, I think it was Constitution Hall, because the Daughters of the American Revolution said, you're not allowed to come because you're African American. That was the reason why. It's unfortunate and terrible, but basically she said, fine, I'm going to go sing over here. And, in fact, Eleanor Roosevelt resigned from that her membership from the Daughters of the American Revolution because they would not let this woman sing. Now, what's cool about this is during this singing in 1939, a much younger Martin Luther King Jr. is in the audience. And then later on, when he gives his I Have a Dream speech, Marianne Anderson's in the audience for him. So this is a big push. It was a noticeable difference in 1939 dealing with civil rights. It was like, oh, they're going to have this African American woman come sing in public. Look, NBC, CBS, all these major people are going to cover this stuff. This is a big deal. And it was a big switch in how, in race relations, just the idea that the president's like, yeah, we'll stick her out there. She's going to sing for us. She has a beautiful voice. That's all it takes to sing. It doesn't matter if she's African American. She's going to go out there and sing and be patriotic on Easter Sunday. It was a good thing. All right, FDR's fireside chats. We've already talked a little bit about it, and there's no picture clip, obviously, because this is a video recording. He would do radio chats, and part of this was done to basically let the people know he's there. He's trying to fix things. He's trying to instill confidence by basically coming out. This isn't from this, but one of the famous quotes from him is, "We have nothing to fear but fear itself." The idea that we're afraid, that's why the economy is being hurt so badly, isn't because things are actually terrible or that we've changed as people. It's that we're afraid. So the fear is what's causing the damage, because the fear is causing panic, and panic's taking money out of the banks and hurting people economically. So he would put out his plans in a real way that people could hear and see. And I've done some more research since the last time I talked about this. Trump doesn't do radio addresses, really. What he does streaming addresses, because now we're in the age of YouTube and live streaming. He also does TV addresses. That's how he kind of handles his weekly address. All right, here are the 3 parts of the New Deal: relief, recovery, and reform. Memorize them, know them forward and backward and what they mean. Relief, take immediate action on economic deterioration. So just jump right in and just stop things from happening, fund what needs to be funded, and basically just regulate things so that the panic and the drop-off stops. Recovery, pump and priming. This is where you start temporary programs to basically increase consumer demand. That can be done by pushing money into the economy. It can be done by taking away money from farmers or giving money to farmers so they don't farm, which decreases supplies, which increases the cost and price. Because remember, we had over surpluses of all these various things like cotton and wheat. So if we reduce the amount that's being produced, that means there's a smaller supply. It means prices go up. It helps the economy grow. And finally, reform. Permanent programs basically put in place to avoid another Great Depression. They're for the sole purpose of making sure that what happened in 1929 until really the late 1930s does not happen again, and we avoid economic disasters. That's the 3-part step: relief, recovery, and reform. That's the New Deal. All right, so the first step, banking reforms. Banks were failing like crazy up until 1933. So on March 5th, the first thing he did was declare a 4-day bank holiday. Because remember, this is back during a time period where you don't have online transactions. If you want to get your money to the bank, you go down to the bank, get your money out. The problem is, if thousands of people do that at the same time, all the money's at the bank, and the bank fails because they have no way to pay out their depositors or the people that have loaned money to them who can't pay. Congress then passed the Emergency Banking Relief Act. Basically, it closed up certain banks. They got inspected and audited by certain inspectors in the government. If they were good and healthy banks and they had the right amount of money on the books, they could reopen automatically. If they were insolvent or unable to pay the debts, they'd stay closed. And if you were kind of in the middle, like, hey, we're on the teeter, we're on the brink, they could take out loans from the government, and then they could basically post them and keep going and then become a healthy bank, hopefully. As a result of this, people started to have more confidence in banks. So remember, the reason why the run on the banks happened wasn't because things are terrible automatically. It's because people got scared. They got scared their money was be gone, and they lost confidence in the banks. So much of the economy in the U.S. and worldwide relates to confidence. If people aren't confident, they don't spend money. If you're not confident in Bank of America, you're not going to put your money in Bank of America. If you're not confident in a certain school, you don't want to go to that school. That's how confidence affects everything. It affects how we spend and choose to use our time and resources. One thing that instills confidence is when you know that your stuff is insured. The FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, at the time they insured money up to $5,000. They're still around today, and the new number is $250,000. So if you're an individual and you have $200,000 in a bank, it's protected. If the bank closes or gets robbed of everything, which doesn't really happen anymore, that money is still protected by the federal government through this Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. It's still here, and they increase the money every now and then. The most recent increase happened after the 2008 financial crisis because it went from $100,000, which wasn't really enough, up to $250,000. I wish I had that kind of money. All right. The Securities and Exchange Commission, so that whole buying on margin, companies being dishonest about how much they were making, all this stuff, well, that was part of laissez-faire economics. Leave businesses alone, the market will take care of itself. The whole idea of social Darwinism combined with laissez-faire, combined with the market principles of just self-regulating markets, that's gone now. The Securities Exchange Commission comes in and polices the stock market. Their job is to go, okay, this company's lying, we're going to find them and regulate the crap out of them. So that you can't issue bonds that are worthless. You can't buy your own bonds and then sell them at a profit at the expense of your shareholders. Basically, it prevents corruption, collusion, other terrible things that were starting to happen and contributed to the financial crisis and the Great Depression. The AAA, the Agricultural Adjustment Act. This is the one I was talking about earlier where they basically paid farmers not to plant crops. And in some cases, they burn the fields. Like they'd already grown. They're like, hey, guys, we're going to do this AAA thing. We'll pay you to burn up the fields you have currently. Wickard v. Filburn is the famous case that comes out of this that you can talk about in civics usually. But look it up. It's a cool case, basically saying that farmers could be told and have their fields taken from them, even if they were just growing it for themselves. A very strange situation. But the idea behind it was if we can reduce the supply of grain, let's say wheat. Let's say we reduce the supply of wheat by half. That reduction in supply changes the ratio of supply and demand in a way that increases price. That increase in price means people have to pay more money for something, which means the farmer gets more money gets spent, more money gets taxed, and basically prompts the economy to go up. More money in the economy means more spending, which in turn means more money in the economy. GDP goes up. It's what we call Keynesian economics, the idea we push money in and we pay somebody to do something so they can spend their money, and the economy kind of goes in a circle where basically you increase as time goes on. We'll talk about some of the flaws related to Keynesian economics and the one big flaw it has. All right, so this is the county agent, the farmers receiving their AAA checks. This is just farmers going in and saying, hey, I'm not going to plant. Give me my AAA check. And they'd hand off the money, and they'd only plant a certain amount of crops. All right, the Tennessee Valley Authority. All right, this is a regional plan for the southeastern U.S., so Tennessee Valley, where they put up flood controls, dams, canals to produce cheap electricity. Now, here's the problem with that. When you dam up a river and create a valley, people own that land. And now that land's underwater. So they got bought out of their land. Some people did not like it, although this was a very successful use of public works, basically eminent domain, to take people's land for fair compensation and then use it to produce electricity with these hydroelectric dams. And this is the whole authority. These are the dams and power plants all across the Tennessee Valley and a little bit into North Carolina. North Carolina is part of the Tennessee Valley. But this is where you get a lot of very inexpensive power that produces high amounts of energy. We love hydroelectric power. It's just hard to do because not everywhere in the country is set up like a valley. You need valleys and rivers to make hydroelectric dams. All right, the National Industry Recovery Act, sometimes abbreviated NERA, sometimes abbreviated NRA, which gets very confusing with the Rifle Association, but we'll get through it. Basically, it was a plan for industrial workers to set minimum wages and maximum hours and recognize basically you want to set up a place where you have rules that exist to help workers make decent money so they can then spend it. That's this whole idea. We have to get money in people's pockets so they can spend it and get the economy moving. The economy is based on spending and confidence. If you're not confident enough to spend, the economy stagnates and doesn't do anything. Now, it used to put conditions and recognize unions. However, this was later found in Constitution by the Supreme Court in a court called Blue Eagle Agency. Don't worry too much about that. We're not going to talk about too much in this class. The big thing you know is the reason behind the NERA Act was basically to promote wages, to get people working, making a decent living, so they could then spend that living and get the economy going. Everything in the New Deal is about priming and pumping up the economy to some degree. So here's some pictures of NERA, abbreviated NRA here. All right. Civilian Conservation Corps, the CCC. So these are collectively all these different agencies that were under the FDR administration, the New Deal, are called alphabet agencies because so many of them have those three-letter abbreviations. This gave young men jobs to go to work, camp, to build national parks, reservoirs. Basically, this is just getting people to work. This is all part of Keynesian economics. Again, they could pay $30 a month and they'd send home $5 a month. This was just to, again, get the economy going and, one, get people working. Because if you're working, you have this inherent feeling of confidence. I'm working for money, my family's secure, and that confidence builds up and you can spend money, which then prompts and pumps the economy. Here's some road construction. All right, now, this is all conditioned on deficit spending. So they're spending money that they don't have. And by them, I'm talking about the U.S. government. New dealers, people who support FDR, wanted to prime the pump. If you put money in, people will go to work, people will spend, and that'll prime the pump and keep things going. It was basically an idea put out by a guy named Keynes, and we call it Keynesian economics. And the very famous stereotype is the government's going to pay somebody, one person, to dig a hole, and then they pay the next person to fill that hole in, where nothing really gets done except money gets put in their pocket. They get money in their pocket, which they then go spend, and that's how you, quote-unquote, prime the pump, and that'll get the economy going, because then they go buy a hat, they go buy a suit, they go buy food for their family, all this other stuff they buy with this money that they've purchased. Now, nothing really, quote-unquote, got done in theory, and that's the stereotype, the digging a hole and filling it in. But the idea behind it was you could still get the economy going even if you deficit spend, because what they'll do is they'll spend that money in the economy and it'll pump the economy up, and after a while it'll self-motivate it. The pump will keep going by itself, and then there will be prosperity and you can stop spending. Now here's the problem. Keynes never really goes into what conditions have to be in place for you to stop priming the pump, and that's where you start running issues. Who gets the primed pump? Does it go to people? Does it go to companies? That's where Keynes doesn't really address things very well. He says, this will work, but he doesn't really put an end game to it. Like, he doesn't say this means you can stop priming the pump. You can stop pumping money in the economy for free, and that's one of the real flaws to it. And this is a chart of the U.S. national debt, and this is all related to priming the pump, the U.S. spending money to boost the economy. And notice it's gone up pretty much exponentially.